This video walks you through the vCOteam.info tutorial, create your own vCloud Director vApp hot clone in less than 1 hour. The raw recording time to complete this tutorial was approximately 40 minutes. The video has been edited for time. Let's get started by confirming that our running vApp has the Copy To dialog grayed out. Next, we'll switch over to our vCenter Orchestrator client, logged in with administrator credentials so that we're able to create and add new elements. We'll start off by going to the Workflows tab, right-clicking on the root element, and we're going to create a new folder to hold our workflows. Since we're testing right now, I'll just create -test. Now once the folder's been created, we right-click on it and select a new workflow. Here we'll specify a workflow name of vApp hot clone. Now that the vApp hot clone workflow has been created, we'll go ahead and right-click on it and select the option to edit. Now it's good practice to go ahead and click on the version number to increment it at least one time as you get started. So we'll just put a comment in there stating that this is the initial version, and as we make changes and saves, we'll go ahead and increment that with the appropriate comments. Now we'll click over to the Schema tab, and then we'll select Action Workflow, and we're going to drag a workflow element onto the palette on the right. Now in the search box, we'll go ahead and just enter clone vApp so that we could find the library workflow for cloning a vApp. Now once that's been added to the palette, we'll right-click on it, select Synchronize, and select Synchronize Presentation. When we're prompted for the confirmation, we go ahead and click OK and then Continue. Now this synchronized presentation will add the appropriate inputs for that sub-workflow to this vApp hot clone workflow that we've created, and it'll also go ahead and add those variables and bind them for all of the inputs. Here we see that the output has not been bound to anything, so we go ahead and drag the vApp out over to the out attributes, and then we look through the list on the left hand side and we confirm that all of our inputs are binding to the appropriate variables. Now we click on the Validate button, and we're warned that the workflow does not have an end, so we'll go ahead and select the quick fix action of Create End, and then we'll go ahead and close. Now that everything's been validated, we'll save and close, and we'll try launching our workflow. Once the form loads up for launching the workflow, we'll go ahead and click on the vApp, and we'll browse to the vApp that we want to clone. Now this will be the XP vApp that we saw earlier in the vCloud Director user interface. It is currently running, so we're going to go ahead and select that one. Now notice that we are selecting from the Dev Test Virtual Data Center. We'll go ahead and specify a new name for the vApp that we're going to be creating from the running vApp XP2. The new one will be named XP3. We'll give a brief description, and we'll set Deploy to Yes. Now we need to designate our destination virtual data center. For this initial test, I'm just going to go ahead and select the same virtual data center that the vApp resides in. And once that's been selected, we'll go ahead and click on Submit. And then we'll take a look in the vCloud Director interface and confirm that indeed we are doing a hot clone of a running vApp. And as we can see here, we've got our XP2 vApp running, and I'm going to go ahead and refresh the interface. Now, it may take a moment for everything to get registered here. There we go. Now we see that the XP2 vApp status is busy, and XP3 status is copying. So we are doing a hot clone of that running vApp. Now we're switching back over to our vCenter Orchestrator client, and we're going to try doing another hot clone, but this time we're going to specify a different virtual data center. So we're going to see whether or not this out-of-the-box workflow is capable of doing a hot clone from one VDC to another VDC. Now we see here that we have a failure. And the exception indicates that the operation could not be executed on vApp XP2 and to stop the vApp and try again. So this is telling us that since that vApp is running, we can't do a clone of it from its current virtual data center to a different one. So what we're going to do is a little workaround. Now we're going to update our workflow so that we do a hot clone of the running vApp into the same virtual data center, and now that result will have a duplicate of that original vApp, and it won't be running. So therefore we should be able to go ahead and clone that particular vApp over to the alternate virtual data center. Once that's been completed, we can go ahead and get rid of that clone duplicate in the same virtual data center. Let's go ahead and get started with those changes now. We need to click on our vApp hot clone workflow, right click it, and then go into edit mode. Once we've gotten into edit mode, we'll go ahead and click on our schema tab. We'll get started by clicking on our clone vApp workflow and reviewing the bindings that we have down below. Now we need to reassign some of these bindings as outlined in the tutorial. We'll need to get started with this by selecting the VDC here on the clone vApp in and dragging it down to the bottom left corner for in attributes. This will prompt us for a new attribute name. So we'll go ahead and give it a name of temp VDC, and then we'll click OK. Now we'll repeat this operation for the power on, deploy, and linked clones. Here we've done the power on. Select the name of temp power on and click OK. Now we'll go ahead and drag down deploy, and we'll give that a name of temp deploy and click OK. Finally, we'll drag linked clone down and let go. We'll give that a name of temp linked clone. Okay, so now we need to set the temp VDC attribute. So in the generic palette, select the scriptable task and drop it into the schema above the vApp clone workflow. Click on the scriptable task Out tab, click on the plus to choose an output attribute, select temp VDC. Alright, now we'll click on the In tab and we'll click on the plus and we'll choose vApp. Now we'll click on the scriptable task scripting tab in the bottom, and we want to enter temp VDC equals vApp.parent semicolon. Now an alternate method of adding this code could help avoid typos. Click the temp VDC out followed by equals, followed by clicking the vApp in, then type a dot and hit Control space for a code completion dialog. Then select parent and type the semicolon. Let's give our new scriptable task a more meaningful name. We'll name it set temp VDC. Now we need to break the line from the start point to the clone vApp workflow so we can move the set temp VDC in line before clone vApp. Now arrange the elements in our schema and link them together. Now before performing the second clone, we need to check if the input parameter destination VDC is different than the parent of the vApp. If not, there is no need to continue the workflow. For this, we're going to use a custom decision box from the generic palette. Drag and drop it on the schema below the first clone, rename it Need Relocation. And we'll break the line from the clone vApp to the endpoint and position the Need Relocation decision box below the clone vApp. And once we have that in position, we'll go ahead and connect clone vApp to Need Relocation, and then we'll click on the In tab in the bottom of the window here while we have Need Relocation selected. Now click on the plus button there and then select VDC. Now click the plus again. This time select temp VDC. Now we'll need to click into the scripting and we'll add the following script. Return vdc.getReference. Notice that we have our brackets in here. .href space not equals temp vdc dot get reference, again our brackets, .href, and we close our brackets and add a semicolon. Next, we'll need to rename the clone vApp before cloning it a second time. Remember, vApp names are unique per organization. In the generic palette, select scriptable task and drop it on the schema below the decision box. Rename it, rename vApp. Renaming a vApp generates a task in vCloud Director. Before getting to the next step, we need to wait for the task to complete. For this, we will use the Wait for Task workflow. In Action and Workflow, select Workflow element and drag and drop it on the schema. Use the search filter by typing wait for task and select the second item that shows up in there. Click in the Visual Binding tab. Link the task in parameter of wait for task to the in attribute box in the bottom left. Select OK to have the attribute created. Click on the In tab of the Rename vApp Scriptable task. Click on the plus to choose an input parameter. Select vApp Out. vApp Out is the output of the first clone. Click on the Out tab. Click on the plus to choose an output attribute. Select Task. Now click on the Scripting tab. Type vappout.name equals vappout.name plus quote dash cloning quote semicolon. On the next line, enter the following. Task equals vappout.update brackets semicolon. We're appending dash cloning to our temporary vApp before cloning it to its final name. The update method performs the update on the VCD server. Update returns a task that will be monitored by the wait for task workflow. Now we need to add a second clone and the delete workflows. For the first one, we can copy and paste the one we already have. Right-click, copy. Now right-click and paste on the schema. In Action and Workflow, select Workflow element and drag and drop it on the schema. Use the search filter by typing delete vApp and select the entry that shows in the results. Click in the Visual Binding tab. The auto binding feature may have already linked the vApp input parameter of our workflow to the one of the delete vApp. Make sure you change this by linking the task in parameter of delete vApp to the vApp out in attribute in the bottom left box. You should end up with something like what's shown in the screen here. Since we copied and pasted the first clone, we need to adjust the second clone visual bindings. Click on the second clone vApp workflow in the schema. Click the Visual Binding tab. Now relink clone vApp to in attribute. vApp out, we need to clone the result of the first clone, not a second time the original vApp. Relink clone vApp VDC to in parameter VDC. We now need to clone to the VDC that was provided as input of our workflow. Relink clone vApp, power on, and deploy to their in parameter counterparts. We want to observe these settings as well. Relink vApp out to the top right out parameter box. This will open a window to create an out parameter. Name it cloned vApp. It is best practice to output the result of your workflow, here the cloned vApp. This will allow you to insert this workflow in other workflows that will be able to use the returned vApp. Now make sure all the boxes are linked. Once done, you can use the validation to help you. Here, the former linked clone input parameter generates a warning since we replaced it with an attribute with a fixed value. You can click on the Quick Fix action, Delete Parameter link to get rid of it. Your workflow should look like what's shown on the screen. Increment your version number with an appropriate comment. Save and close. Run your workflow again. This time it will take more time to complete, but it should be successful at hot cloning a vApp from one VDC to another one. In the Tools menu, User Preferences, Inventory, there is a Use Contextual Menus in Inventory checkbox. You can check it if not already done. Now, from the Inventory tab, you can start your hot vApp clone with right-clicking on a selected vApp. Congratulations! You should now have a workflow capable of performing a hot clone of a vApp in your vCloud Director environment.